It is time for us to go to the burning platform for today. Of course, every week there's something in breaking news, but today is especially warm. I'm also thrilled that we're able to bring you, quite apart from the current affairs situation, which is as hot as hell, we're also bringing you one of the most consequential authors of our time, one of South Africa's best investigative reporters, and someone who has been no stranger to controversy, and someone who's done a lot of the heavy lifting and the yeoman's work when it comes to South Africa and trying to understand the disastrous corruption of the last 10 years, 12 years, however many years it's been. He is Jacques Pauw, who I'm thrilled to say is joining us this morning live to discuss his new book called Our Poisoned Land, Living in the Shadows of Zuma's Keepers. Also, the full coterie of people on the burning platform this morning, our own Phumi Mashiko, as ever, and Kanthan Pillay this morning too. Phumi and Kanthan for a proper Christmas style show to start December. And let's just turn our attention right up front to what happened yesterday. Jacques, it's a great pleasure to have you on the show. Jacques Pauw, well done on the new book. Congratulations. How is the new book being received?
Well, they were obviously a mixed reaction to the book. The book had hardly hit the shelves, or we received a letter from Julius Malema
Yes.
ordering us to remove the book from the shelves by 5 o'clock that afternoon, saying that if we don't remove the book, he will exercise all his legal options, which might include an urgent application to remove the book. Now, since then, we haven't heard from Mr. Malema at all, which is very strange. It's 2 weeks later. He hasn't sued for defamation. He hasn't released a statement again. And we were utterly surprised because both Malema and his sugar daddy, Adriano Mazzotti, are known to be very eager litigants. None of them have sued us for defamation. Mazzotti has threatened to sue me for defamation for years and years and years. Absolutely nothing has happened. And I think, people must draw their own conclusions.
Are you going to have a launch? They might still show up at the launch.
We had sort of a closed launch, probably 10 days ago. When I published The President's Keepers, there were absolute mayhem during the launches, especially the one in Johannesburg. And not only were exclusive books hesitant to have an open launch where everybody is welcome to attend, but we decided this time we're going to have a closed launch. We're going to broadcast it live, which we did, and all went very well. I'm not one for publicity. I never want to go through what I went through in November, December 2017.
It's worth reflecting. I mean, your first chapter, basically, you explain the situation of your last book launch. You take tweets from people. You discuss what actually happened there. It's a hell of an intro. I mean, that's dramatic in itself. And I recall last time I spoke to you, you had to come through to our studios. You had to have bodyguards. There were security people all around because there were very genuine concerns around your safety. I'm pleased that Julius Malema and all his supporters and his friends and his sugar daddies, as you call them, are backing down on their threats, because I'm curious as to what exactly it was that he didn't want published. We'll get to that in a moment. But obviously there's a bark and no bite situation going on here, and he's probably less dangerous than he's ever been. A lot of people have seen through the smoke and mirrors that Julius Malema has been orchestrating for the number of years that he's been in our public discourse. Before we get into that, though, if you don't mind, I want to just ask Kanthan to explain to us what the hell is going on in the ANC. And feel free to jump in here, Jacques, Phumi, at any given moment, because we may not have a president for very long. We may have to have Cyril repeat what has been the course of action for all of our presidents except Mandela in not completing their term, as Phumi put it earlier. Kanthan, please take the floor. You were WhatsApping us last night late. Tell us what the hell's happened.
You mustn't be WhatsApping people that late on a Thursday. We must get ready to be here early in the morning, please.
I have no time for you youngsters and your proclivities.
Go on, Kanthan, tell us.
I tweeted yesterday before the report came out that essentially Ramaphosa was taking the Bart Simpson defense. And the Bart Simpson defense, you might remember, is I didn't do it. Nobody saw me do it. You can't prove a thing. And that's essentially what he did. And I think a lot of people were of the view that former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo was going to be soft on it, because you might remember there was a statement from the former Chief Justice saying that he was going to confine his report precisely to the terms that were defined by Parliament, and he was not going to venture outside of that. And everyone turned around and said, oh, this means that the guy is basically captured. Well, it turns out that working within that very precise framework, the team, and I don't want to say that it was just the former Chief Justice. There was a team of 3 people, and they went through a point by point analysis of all of the allegations that were leveled against the president. And ultimately, what they came up with was that the guy had actually broken the code of conduct consistently. So where does this leave us right now? Well, you see the difference in terms of what the ANC has done in the past is that at the time that they removed Mbeki, for example, Mbeki was no longer president of the African National Congress, which meant that it was then very easy to then hold essentially a kangaroo court in Parliament and then send a delegation to him and tell him, step down or we're going to recall you. And Mbeki then proceeded to step down. The difference, of course, that we have right now is that Parliament is packed with Cyril Ramaphosa's people. And so it's a very different scenario to the Nicholson judgment that led to the removal of Mbeki. It subsequently transpired that the Nicholson judgment was flawed, you might remember. But by that time, the damage had been done and Mbeki had been ousted. The question right now is whether all of the people who have gone to bat for Ramaphosa this year, who are sitting in Parliament right now, are now going to stand up and say, well, you've in fact broken the rules of engagement and you need to be stepping down. My suspicion is that the ANC is not going to do that. And the reason why they're not going to do that is that they are all in Parliament at Ramaphosa's behest. So at that level, this ends up being a clusterfuck of note.
That's a hell of a way to describe it.
Okay, but executive summary, just remember, okay, the recommendation, okay, the panel concluded that prima facie, the president may have committed a serious violation of sections 96(2)(a), a serious violation of section 34(1), serious misconduct in the way the president violated section 90. It just carries on, goes on. Section 92, section 90, but serious misconduct. And so, prima facie that he may have, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that he has. But
he's got a case to answer to.
But he has a case to answer to. But, just simply, based on the evidence that was submitted, any reasonable person would draw the conclusion that our president is either A, incompetent, B, corrupt, or C, both.
Well, any comments on this as it relates to, because you see a book like yours, Jacques, is terrific. But the moment it's published, there's new information starting to come out the very next day. So when you see things like this, how does that look when you've spent such a long time putting together? And I have to say, this is fairly exhaustive. What I love about your book is that there are footnotes at the end that explain all of your sources, that give absolutely no room for anybody to misquote you, to say that you've got false information, to say that you haven't checked your sources properly. I love a good book with footnotes, and you spend a large number of pages at the back making sure that people know what the details of all your allegations, your suspicions, your points of view here are. and it's a real work. But when you look at what Cyril's going through at the moment, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think what has happened yesterday is, amongst others, the results of the president, who was not willing to take South Africa into his confidence and to tell them what had happened at Phala Phala. The allegations were made in June. The president has still not explained it. He's given answers to the parliamentary investigation, but that's as far as it goes. And I think this is once again an indictment of an exquisitely weak president, a president who has put the welfare of the party before the welfare of the country, and I think he's going to get weaker and weaker, whatever happens next. And we have to remember that the Chief Justice has merely said that he might have contravened the Constitution and other misdemeanors. That still has to be investigated. But Ramaphosa, over the past 2-3 years, has been an extremely weak president. He started all very well. We'll all remember that first year of the Ramaphosa presidency, when he addressed the shortcomings in the law enforcement agencies. He fired Tom Uyani. He appointed a new national director of public prosecutions. He appointed a new head of the Hawks. He made changes at the State Security Agency, the SARS Commission, the panel that investigated the SSA. So he started all very well. And then he started putting the welfare of the ANC before the welfare of the country. And what we're sitting with today, whatever is going to happen in the next 2 weeks, or in the next month, or in the next 3 months, he's going to remain a very weak president, because he's not been willing to act against people sitting in his cabinet who are useless. I mean, Bheki Cele was failed commissioner of police. He has no moral authority to be the minister of police. People like Gwedi Montage, Lindiwe Sisulu. I mean, there's a long list of them. He hasn't been willing, and he hasn't been able to act against them. And he's a very, very weak president today. And I think we're going to see it in the weeks and the months to come, whatever happens with this inquiry.
Well, let's get into your book, because this is a really, really tough read, because it really brings us face to face with how absolutely disrupted, disgusting, and messy our criminal justice system, among other things, are. But let's talk about the law enforcement agencies, because you spend quite a lot of time here going into that. They haven't got to grips with serious and organized crime in this country. There are people getting away with blue murder. Our prisons are full of seemingly people who've been arrested for dealing in drugs, or small crimes that the ordinary people get arrested. If you and I don't pay our taxes by 500 Rand or 50 Rand or even 50 cents, SARS are on us like that. But it seems that if you're doing large scale corruption and crime and fraud and all the really bad stuff, you kind of get a free pass in South Africa. And that's been the case for probably the last 10 years, right?
Absolutely. I started writing this book when a top policeman came to me, and he spoke to me about what had happened with the PRASA investigation, which is in my book. Here is damning evidence coming from a series of forensic investigations about the looters of PRASA that were given to the Hawks in 2015 already by the then chairperson of PRASA, who was Popo Molefe, and a real hero of the fight against state capture. So there was a series of investigations done by Treasury and done by several private forensic firms. They investigated 213 contracts at PRASA. Only 13 were found to be above board. There were two big contracts, the one for acquiring new locomotives, and the other one for security upgrades. The one was 3.5 billion Rand, and the other one was 4.5 billion Rand. That money is gone. That money has stolen. We know who the looters at PRASA is. We know the names. They've been mentioned at the State Capture Commission. That evidence, damning evidence, was given to the Hawks in 2015. Year after year after year, more evidence came forward as various High Court judges set these contracts aside. And in every case, the court spoke about the corruption that was committed at PRASA. Those investigations are gone. And I then started investigating what had happened to this evidence. Where is this evidence? And it's then, for example, that I discovered that the police general who was in charge of the PRASA investigations and who sabotaged these investigations during the Zuma years is now the head of organized crime at the Hawks. His second in command, who was with him, is now the acting head of the Serious Economic Crimes Unit at the Hawks. And it was absolutely shocking to discover how top policemen who were appointed during the Zuma years are still in the Hawks. They're still in crime intelligence. And they're now clinging to their jobs, not because they believe in state capture, but they're now there for their pensions and their positions and their salaries and whatever. And if you look at organized crime, Treasury a while ago warned Ramaphosa that South Africa is on the brink of becoming a mafia state or a criminal state. There was a while ago there was a very authoritative report by an organization that specializes in investigating organized crime. They came to the conclusion that South Africa now has the 18th most organized crime in the world. There's 12 categories of organized crime. 4 of them are stable, 8 of them are on the rise. We see it, and it's not just organized crime. Quarter after quarter after quarter, the Minister of Police take to the podium, and crime is going up and up and up. We have no grip on crime. Absolutely nothing.
Pums.
And it's also a little bit of a lack of political will. So I hear you say that Ramaphosa has been warned, that people have made it out of the Zuma years. They've moved sideways or upwards. And what it really is about is it's also a level of needing to take the bull, the ankole by its horns, maybe, on the part of our president, and make tough decisions. And it's not surprising that he continues to put his party before the country. He's said as much in numerous interviews. So it can't surprise us that his actions actually, I mean, the man is consistent in his actions, and he is honest with it, right? He said it before he became the president of South Africa, and he has continued to act in exactly that way, right? And the lack of political will, because the truth of the matter is that it will also have a knock-on effect on the party when you make decisions that put people in prison, when you make decisions that tear apart those criminal syndicates, because it's so entrenched within the corridors of power. There are so many people linked to so many different people. You talk about that Siangena contract at PRASA and all of the top dogs that are related to it. Somebody else in the comments asked about Lindiwe Sisulu. Is she clean of all of them? And my answer is, I don't think we can look at any one of the top brass of the ANC and say that they are clean. The easy answer is unlikely, because we don't have the evidence yet. We have had, with every successive administration, some form of a commission to uncover the corruption that was done by the administration before. And it continues. We continue. The only way that we're going to be able to move out of the rut that we're in is if we have a political change And that change has to be with individuals who have a political will to end not just the corruption, but also end the non what's the word, accounted, people taking
The lack of accountability.
accountability, right? But it's got to be at the political level. It's got to be at a political level before
Well,
it will trickle down.
I agree. I mean, if you look at the evidence at the State Capture Commission, there was clear evidence, for example, implicating a cabinet minister like Gwedi Mantashe in corruption, a senior ANC member like Nomvulo Mokonyane. Nothing has happened. Where's the investigations? Nothing. Absolutely nothing has happened. Not only is Gwedi Mantashe the king of coal in this country, he also has a sword hanging over his head. What does it tell? What does it tell other politicians, other members of other members of the cabinet, members of parliament? You can get away with it. There's no
But what does
consequences.
it tell the policeman on the street? What
and
does
the
it tell
ordinary
the policeman on the
and
street
the ordinary
that they can
citizen. I
get
mean,
away with it?
the ordinary South African citizen is looking at this going, well, if all of those guys are getting away with it, why the hell should I be honest? Why should I do all the right things? And why should I follow the law?
Yeah.
Kanthan, you've also been banging this drum for a long time. And I know that you guys might have had sight of Jacques' book already. By the way, Jacques, I just love the way you refer to Prasa as the Prasa Nostra. And I want to ask you about Lucky Montana just now. But Kanthan, I mean, you've got lots of questions around who these organized criminals are. Who are these people?
Yeah, I guess I was taking a look at kind of the tail end of what Jacques had to say. And he talks about what happens when Jacob Zuma was pushed out, and the range of things that Cyril Ramaphosa ended up doing at the time. So just taking a look at he spoke about Arthur Fraser going. Now it turns out that Arthur Fraser was in fact the person that's directly responsible for exposing Ramaphosa's potential corruption. So, Arthur Fraser going is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, we've got Moyane being fired and Kisweta being appointed in his space. Now, it's become very clear that SARS is still very selective in terms of who it ends up persecuting in terms of tax liabilities. You still have not had any of the lifestyle audits taking place for any members of Ramaphosa's government, which was something that should have happened. Sean Abrams went, yeah, that's cool, but Shamila Batoy comes in as head of the NPA, but hey, how long have we been talking about the lack of prosecutions under Shamila Batoy? For a few years now. But Jacques, the point that I'm trying to get to out here is there's nothing wrong with what you've been saying in terms of, actually addressing all of the corruption that took place under the Zuma regime. But I think that, the idea that there's an inherent goodness to Ramaphosa that is absent in Jacob Zuma, I think that's fundamentally flawed. I think that the ANC as a whole actually has this so deeply ingrained. And the reason why, Jacques, I think that he's not doing things like getting rid of Gwede Mantashe, getting rid of Lindiwe Sisulu, is it goes back to the Smolanyana skeletons that we were talking about years ago. Phumi, what do you think?
Absolutely. We are talking about a culture that has taken root in the ANC. And it's not a Zuma culture. It's an ANC culture that you can get away with anything for the sake of unity of the party. Ramaphosa is prepared to excuse anything. He hasn't, it's very important, he hasn't ordered the lifestyle investigations into his cabinet that he said he would do. If you think when he came to power, he said he's going to appoint a lean and mean cabinet. He's going to get rid of all the fat around him. Nothing like that has ever happened.
Even the underperformers remain. Even the underperformers remain.
No, absolutely. Everybody remains. I think you can do virtually anything, and you can stay a minister in the cabinet. Top performers are treated like the low level performers. I mean, it's
Who's
all
a top performer though?
absolutely fun.
Who would be a top performer in your books?
I'm trying to think.
It might take
God,
us a while.
I don't. Definitely not the deputy president. I don't know. I
You
don't know.
see,
Okay. All right.
I
Let
don't
me
know.
ask you.
I mean,
Let me ask about the organized criminals, because these are the guys who operate outside of political structures but influence them heavily. And where the money goes is, I think, what a lot of people are interested in. Who are the most dangerous people in South Africa, and how much influence do they have on the politicians?
well, it's very difficult to be a successful organized criminal without having links to the state, having links to the law enforcement agencies. If you think about, for example, the looters of Prasa, and we know them, Mabunda, Mashaba, Roy Moodley, Ferreira, we know who they are. There was evidence against them at the State Capture Commission. They all had political links in Prasa, just like the looters of Transnet and the looters of Eskom had political links in government. And that's why it was so easy for the looters of Prasa, for example, to siphon off the hundreds of millions of rand that went missing. I mean, as an example, the 2.8 billion rand, for example, were paid out for the locomotives, 70 new locomotives for Prasa. We received 30 locomotives who were too tall. They're useless. Where's the rest of the money? It's absolutely gone. One of the main looters, Mr. Ashwell Mashaba, the businessman, is so arrogant that not only did he acquire, for example, a 5-star lodge in Limpopo, an award-winning lodge where it cost like 13,000 rand per person per night. He even named the lodge after himself. He didn't even try to hide his money. It's called AM Lodge after his initials, Ashwell Mashaba. This is how arrogant these people are. They don't even try to hide their money, and there's absolutely no case against it. And it's the case with lots of organized criminals.
But what we also don't talk about, and because you use the Prasa example, and so much has been written about it, and big ups to people like Ground Up, who have never given up on that story and kind of staying with it. What we also don't talk about is we don't talk about how successive what they call accounting authorities or boards come into that environment, and every one of them walks in like parading heroes, like they're going to try and fix the situation, but actually all that they're there to do is paper over the crack and make the public feel like there's going to be a change. And what happens on the underneath is they continue trying to further this looting. I mean, you talk about the two toll trains, and the Siangena thing for me is so irritating at every level, because you have a Judge Makubela, for instance, comes in, becomes the chairperson of Prasa, and the first thing that she gets there and does is try and push through this payment, even though there is a court judgment that says this was incorrectly awarded and that this money should be recovered by Prasa. She cannot do that because of amazing civil servants within the organization and whistleblowers who keep fighting back. And because she can't get the job done, she is pushed aside and her entire board is pushed aside. A brand new board is brought in, and we're told that they're going to clean up the mess. And what do? They victimize the whistleblowers. They put them, they victimize the whistleblowers. They put them on suspensions. All sorts of illegalities happen, and they try and push through this payment, which is what political connectivity does for you.
Absolutely.
Because,
it's a very good example you mentioned, because the current head of the board at Prasa is Mr. Leonard Ramatlakana, who is an ANC, a deployed ANC cadre. He was, among others, the chairperson of the parliamentary committee on transport. He was there during the years of looting. He was also on the on the police standing committee, where he played a major role to get rid of Robert McBride, who was then the head of IPID, because he was investigating the Commission of Police. And it just seems that cader deployment, that's been so devastating.
Board get there and trumped up charges. There's a new CEO at PRASA. They've had a new CEO almost every year. Every time there's a board change, there's a new CEO. Charges that for some reason, this particular, and Matthews, suddenly we find out that Matthews actually has a dual citizenship, and therefore he cannot hold a senior position in what? Did they not know this before he was given the job?
No, because he wasn't vetted properly because of what's going on at the State Security Agency as well.
This is the point, right? So now he is pushed aside, and now if he's not vetted properly, who else is not vetted properly? This is how deep it goes.
It's almost as though PRASA is being set up again to be looted at some point.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt, yeah.
But there would need to be a cash injection first.
Which gets signed off at Treasury.
Well, I mean, if you look at the amount of money that's been set aside for rebuilding PRASA, remember it was supposed to have been rebuilt by Lucky Montana and people following him. Now they're going to attempt to rejuvenate PRASA once again. So you are talking about massive contracts, and I think we have to keep a very close eye on what is going to happen there. Same with Transnet, same with, to a certain extent, with Eskom. The state-owned enterprises remain. I mean, they're there for the taking. Our checks and balances are not always good enough. The parliamentary committees are not doing their job. That's why Judge Zondo said the other day that he's not sure that if state capture happens again, that Parliament would be able to prevent
it. Kanthan, you took a train this week, though. I mean,
no, I did not get on the train. I did not get on the train. I just shared the video with you, and effectively, this is the first of the Metro Rail trains that are running between Soweto and Park Station in Johannesburg.
The blue trains.
Yeah. And yes,
and they're beautiful.
They're beautiful. 8.50 to get from Soweto through to Johannesburg, and I think that's brilliant. The question, of course, is how long they're going to be running. And before, and a range of things end up happening. We saw this happening more than 20 years ago. You might remember that the first thing that happened was that the taxi drivers would actually fling the conductors from moving trains and murder them. And that was a direct result of the fact that funding had been pulled for railway police, which had existed, going back into the dark days of apartheid.
Yeah.
So, it's one of these things where it's one step forward.
The security contract at PRASA and Metro Rail is still under contestation. So I'm sure that's in your book too, hey Jacques.
Yeah, a judge has to decide how much work was really done. We don't know how long it's going to take. But I just want to say, you also have to feel for PRASA. I mean, they're in such a difficult position. They, as you say, they open lines and then there's a security breakdown. If you think about the Central Line in Cape Town, for example, where people now live on the rails, how do you get rid of them? What do you do? They are in a terrible, terrible situation. But it is absolutely vital that we restore, especially Metro Rail. You have to provide safe and cheap transport for people to get from their places of work to their homes. I mean, it's ironic to think that just 12 years ago, when we had the Soccer World Cup, remember how brilliant Metro Rail was then? We built new stations, we built new lines, and they performed brilliantly 12 years ago.
Yes, but that's because we had outsourced our country to FIFA at the time. Remember, we literally suspended rule of law in our constitution.
Sure.
In order to ride roughshod over the rights of. Now people are staying on those lines, and you have a fundamentally liberal court that says actually you need to provide alternative housing
Yeah,
before we can clear the railway tracks for the
yeah,
benefit of the populace.
So,
sure.
So it's
yeah.
we need to outsource our state security to Rwanda for starters. We need to outsource. We could go on, but Jacques, I just want to make a point. I don't feel for Prasa at all, because a particular drum I've been beating on for years. Prasa needs to be broken up. All of the metro rail services need to be handed over
Yeah,
to the local authorities. So I want the city of
sure.
Cape Town to actually
Cape
be
Town to run it.
responsible, yeah, to be
Absolutely.
running it,
Yeah,
and they will do a much better
yeah.
job on it.
Like it
Similarly,
happens around the world.
absolutely, and
Yeah,
really all you need then is for Transnet to be a provider of the rail infrastructure,
yeah,
and everyone else actually makes use of that infrastructure.
Um,
It's this entire idea of centralized authority with the ANC
mm,
government,
yeah.
which is a disaster.
And
Policing, another case
and
in
can I
point.
also say that, like, here's a very good question from Stink Mina, which I'd love you to
Uh-huh.
answer. Every SOE is collapsing, but nobody asks how Pravin still has a job.
mm. Absolutely. And I think it
You speak,
is.
I mean,
It's absolutely valid. There was a stage when Pravin Gordhan stood up against Jacob Zuma, and he was when Zuma tried to prosecute him, he became a hero of the anti-Zuma faction. But it is very difficult to understand why he still has a job. I mean, with the
Yeah.
state-owned enterprises doing so absolutely dismally, each and every one of them.
listen, no, he's selling SAA without opening up the books.
Yeah,
So nobody really knows about that transaction and how that transaction is going to go.
yeah.
And the same thing is now happening at Eskom. They have still not produced their financials for the past 2 years to the authority down in Parliament. And very soon, I think we're going to hear that it is also being sold for 51 Rand.
Uh, you know,
Nobody, but hey, Pravin is a hero. He was
Mm.
the
well, I
leader
mean,
of
this,
the anti-Zuma function.
he's made of like Teflon or something. But Jacques, your book, if nothing else, is fascinating to me because you are interspersing between paragraphs of real information and storytelling and kind of laying out the facts. You also you're putting tweets in there, which is probably a first. I mean,
Yes, in fact, Twitter probably needs to get 50% of the credit for the book, Jacques, because
You know,
you know tweets
you,
pop up every
you,
every
you
now and
know,
then.
you know why I did it, and some people love it and some people hate it. And I'm not a tweeter myself. I mean, I have a Twitter account, but I never use it. Is that there was a time when people said that newspapers are the first draft of history. Now, sort of like social media has almost become the first draft of history. But I think why I use the Twitters, number one, it gave me an opportunity to credit my sources. So instead of saying News 24 said that, you have a
right.
tweet from News 24 and you've credited your source. One of the reasons why. And the second thing is that you don't always then need a paragraph to explain something. You use the tweet that came out that day, and that's why I use Twitter. But I'm not saying it was clever or not. I decided to use Twitter because it's different as well. You know how difficult it is to write a current affairs book. People hardly read a 2,000-word article in Daily Maverick. It's too
People
much.
write 2,000-word articles.
Yeah, in Daily Maverick. That's the only place. Anyway, so now you write a book of 350,000 words. I mean, how do you get people to read this book? You have to make it interesting. You have to make it different. You have to tell stories in between, and that's why I use the tweets.
Well, I certainly wasn't criticizing it. I find it quite refreshing, and I think it's a
Same
it's a
here. Yes.
novel direction to take things in. Your
I
one
have a
chapter.
question.
Yeah, sorry, Pums, go
I
ahead.
have a question. When you're researching and writing a book of this nature, because current affairs is shifting so
Mm.
quickly, how do you decide what to leave out?
Okay, this was an absolute nightmare because the book was supposed to come out in May, and then Judge Zondo started postponing his final reports, and I had to wait for the final report on the State Security Agency and PRASA, which was towards the end. And he started postponing. The book was supposed to come out in May, and that's why it only came out in beginning of November. But that also left me with the fact that some of the stuff I had written earlier, like a year and a half ago, was not current anymore. So I had to rewrite lots of chapters. Some chapters I just threw out. You know, the question of Becky Kelly, for example, throughout writing this book, I always had a feeling that Ramaphosa might actually do the right thing and fire him. I write a lot about Becky Kelly, and if he was fired, what would I have done with all the information about Becky Kelly? It suddenly becomes irrelevant. So it's a nightmare to write a book like this.
Well, I mean, you've got a couple of interesting chapters. I suggest that the chapter which Julius Malema was most keen to have excised from your book is Simba and Pumbaa, which is hilarious. I mean, they're obviously the two characters from The Lion King, and it's fairly evident to anyone who reads it that you're talking about Mazotti and Malema there. What is the nature of their relationship, and what have you discovered, and what has been, if there are any updates since you put that chapter together, on just how blatant and obvious their relationship is, and how you know one of them is being used and thinks they're not?
Well, you know, just to start with, the fact that Malema lives from the handouts of others, or that he gets handouts from others, are not new. I mean, we all remember the On Point Gwangwa episode in the Limpopo province.
The gutting of Limpopo.
Yes,
you mean
absolutely.
The gutting of Limpopo.
I mean, there's been the VBS Bank where 1.89 billion rand was stolen by executives. 16.5 million rand found its way to Brian Shivambu, Floyd's brother. Another 5 million rand in unlawful loans went to Brian Shivambu, and from there he dispersed it to Floyd Shivambu, Julius Malema, and the EFF. So the fact that Malema gets handouts from other people is nothing new. The relationship between Malema and Mazotti started when he was the ANC Youth League leader. So it goes back more than a decade. Mazotti has, for example, admitted that he paid 200,000 rand in 2014 towards the registration of the EFF for the general election. Afterwards, Carnelings, that's Mazotti's cigarette company, a director of Carnelings gave Malema a loan, to a R1 million loan, to repay some of his SARS debt. So they've been having this relationship for quite some time. There's nothing new about it. The problem is, among others, that Mazotti is a self-confessed criminal. He was in terrible problems with SARS in 2014. They wanted around 600 million rand from him and Carnelings, or from Carnelings. He then, in an effort to make a deal with SARS, he made an affidavit in which he admitted that he is a cigarette smuggler, that he's committed fraud, that he's committed bribery, that he's attempted to bribe top executives in SARS, that he uses money to entertain politicians, etc., etc., etc. So Mazotti is not clean. And I produce other evidence in the book about his criminal activities. So Mazotti is not clean. It's not the kind of person that the leader of the second biggest opposition party should be in bed with. And then I received the information from two former employees of Mazotti that witnessed the relationship between them, that witnessed money changing hands, that witnessed the debauched parties that happened in Mazotti's secret apartment in Sandton. And it is, I say once again, I think it's very significant that Malema, on day one of the book coming out, made a hell of a noise about it. So did Mazzotti. And then Malema ordered us to remove the book from the shelves. Then he threatened with legal action, and absolutely nothing has happened. And there is no doubt that there is a coordinated strategy to ignore the allegations, and hopefully they will go away, I think.
You know what?
The wishful thinking that we indulge in as South Africans.
Yeah,
Gotta love it.
I mean,
All right,
what is
guys, can I just quickly? Sorry, Pums, I want to throw this in
you go.
because I feel like a lot of people are on the page that some of our listeners are on, where they make the default assumption that this government is just incompetent and that the state is collapsing because of mistakes or incompetence or bad people in bad position in the right positions, etc., as opposed to this being part of the plan. Maybe the ANC is doing this on purpose. Maybe their purpose is to liquidate the country, and it's all intentional. Is that not a possibility?
I think it is a
it's a hell of a
possibility.
conspiracy theory.
Well, in fact, Jacques, I just need to point out in the conclusion of your book, one of the things, because you clearly are a shill for the renewable energies project, and more power to you, because I certainly want a cleaner environment as well. But if you take that as a case in point, ask yourself who is going to benefit from the collapse of Eskom and this quest for renewables, and ask yourself who are the owners of nearly all of those IPP contracts, and into which camp they end up falling. So, in fact, what we end up doing is, because we go down this path of saying the ANC is corrupt, everything is collapsing, and we need to privatize and bring in all of this stuff. And guess what? The beneficiaries of exactly those processes are going to be, again, shadowy, as case of the privatization of SAA is a very good example. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but ultimately it's about the private sector is going to come to the rescue, and we know it's nothing of the sort. Same thing in terms of Eskom and the independent power producers. Private sector is going to come to the rescue. Again, nothing of that sort is going to happen. I think we end up being our own worst enemies in this case, because we have this belief that we put all of our faith in the fact that a particular faction is bad. In this case, it was the Zuma regime, which led to the collapse of Eskom, led to the collapse of PRASA, led to the collapse of SAA, and so forth. Let's now swing around. Let's bring in saviors, great white saviors in most cases. Andre de Ruyter being, the sole champion that's leading the charge right now. And guess what? Things actually still continue to go worse. And until we get to the point where we stop trying to separate this idea that there are good guys and bad guys, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. They're all bad guys.
I mean, we haven't even started talking about the state visit to the UK. Do you think that was just a coincidence that, Prince Charles just has such an affinity to South Africa that that's the first state visit that he would want? How much time do you think was devoted talking about the NHI and selling that entire concept to us?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, and I think the core problem is bad political appointments in virtually each and every portfolio in government and cabinet. And unless we're going to appoint people who can actually make a difference, very little is going to change. We can't continue with Gordhan as the Minister of State-Owned Enterprises. We can't continue with Gwedi Montage as the Minister of Energy. We need efficient decision makers in crucial positions. Can't continue with Becky Kelly as the Minister of Police. He's too tainted. And you can go down the list. I mean, I can virtually mention and name all of them. We need efficient political appointments, people that can make decisions.
But who's there?
Can I toss in some predictions at this point, Gareth? We've only got a couple of minutes left.
Go for it.
Okay, so I think that the next thing that's going to happen in this Ramaphosa saga is we are going to have a recall, but the recall is not going to be of Ramaphosa. The recall is going to be of Didi Mabuza. and Didi Mabuza is going to be recalled, and Paul Mashatile is going to become the deputy president of the country.
And the kingmaker and the successor. Absolutely, I agree with you.
Absolutely. So I think that so if we watch this play out over the next period, that's my call in terms of what's going to happen. Gareth,
look at Gareth's face. Do you see Gareth last night? I sent the text? Why I sent the WhatsApp last night to the group to say, listen, I'm going to bed, and I'm just going to watch this thing play out, and on Monday, Paul Mashatile will be the president.
Do you think Parliament will vote in favor of a full-scale parliamentary investigation or inquiry?
No.
Will they protect Ramaphosa to that extent?
Yes.
On the 6th of December, and if the DA gets what they want, where they have a roll call vote, which is what they have written to the speaker to ask for, where each individual is called up by name and they have to say yes or no. Yeah. On the 6th of December, 4 days, is it 4 days before they go into their conference? You are not going to have those parliamentarians standing up against the strongest candidate for the ANC leadership. They are not going to do it. So we're not going to have that vote going against Ramaphosa.
We're not going to have a parliamentary inquiry.
No, we are not going to have a parliamentary inquiry. We're going to go into the next election cycle of the ANC, and Ramaphosa is going to be very strong. There's going to be a lot of haggling over there. But I think the person who is most likely to come out the winner is Paul Mashatile.
Look, frankly, at this point, we don't need a parliamentary inquiry, guys. Actually, what we need is a criminal investigation that's, conducted by the police. Yes.
And hopefully Shabila will take it to court. Is that what we're looking
at? I cannot suggest in any stronger terms that if you're going to do some reading, it's not exactly pleasant reading if you happen to be on holiday, but it's stuff you need to know. We need to be an informed citizenry. We need to know what actually happened in the last few years in South Africa and exactly how twisted and poisoned everything is. Jacques Pauw's book is called Our Poisoned Land, Living in the Shadow of Zuma's Keepers. Before we let you go, though, Jacques, it wouldn't be right if Kanthan gets to make a prediction. Do you have any predictions for the next couple of weeks, and anything that you'd like to throw in there as an addendum to the book before we say goodbye to you?
I actually agree with him. I think it would be incredibly brave of the ANC to vote in favor of a full-scale parliamentary inquiry. I don't think that's going to happen. I, however, do not agree that Ramaphosa is going to emerge stronger. Although he will be re-elected with Paul Mashatile as his deputy, I don't think he's going to emerge very strong. And I think we are going to see Mashatile as the president before Ramaphosa's second term expires.
Is anyone going to be arrested is all we seem to ask time after time. And is Shamila Batoy actually going to have the cheek to take a state pension when she eventually vacates her office? There's so many other questions. Jacques, congratulations on the book. I'm thrilled that you could be with us on the show this morning. And again, just read this over the holidays, even if it gives you a headache.
And just remember that there are two Jacques Pauws, as Jacques points out in his book.
Yes, correct.
Thank you, guys.
And Phumi, and we'll see you guys soon. Jacques, have a lovely holiday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very good. That's the burning platform for this morning, everybody. We will